So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this session on ecological protection. We're going to get started. There's just a little bit of technology and introduction I want to get through. And so you are joining the workshop on ecological protection. And as with all sessions and workshops in the summit, this one is being recorded. I'm your moderator for the panelist discussion. And so we're going to start the main session now with presentations from our 5 guest speakers. And I just want to say a few things about the session topic. So this workshop is on ecological protection, which is recognized as a core climate change strategy and was mentioned by Maria Morgado and in her references to the decade of ecosystem restoration and the Paris Agreement and the bond challenges. So all basically international level efforts that recognize the vital importance of ecological protection and restoration in the climate change efforts. The collective impact of preserving and restoring forests, wetlands, oceans, and other vital ecosystems is seemingly indeterminate, but we know that the potential to contribute to over 1/3 of the total climate change mitigation, according to climate scientists, can be found in this very effort. So it just really underscores why the Climate Emergency Task Force takes this on as an important theme and why our guests are such strong advocates for this particular area. So with that, I will just say I will introduce our speakers. So today we have Shannon Biggs and Pennie Opal Plant from Movement Rights. They're going to speak first. And then we'll have Karym Sanchez, excuse me, Karym Sanchez and Tacy Crocker from North Bay Organizing Project. And then finally, but not least, we are going to hear from Assembly Member Ash Kalra. And I welcome all of our guests. We're very grateful for their presence here today and participation. And I'll say a little bit more as I introduce our speakers. So Shannon and Pennie, to start, who both I know have had years of movement rights work well before they formed Movement Rights in 2014. But in the years since Movement Rights was formed, co-founders Shannon and Pennie have been working with communities to align human laws and the laws of nature by advancing legal rights, particularly for Indigenous people. And so with that, I'd like to invite them to speak more about themselves and their work.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just want to ask how long we have to speak. So don't like take up all the room.
About 10 minutes.
Okay, great.
Actually, between you and Shannon, you have about 20 minutes.
Oh, awesome. So I'll just start at the very beginning, where at one point, not that long ago in human history, human beings all lived within the natural laws of Mother Earth. And for Indigenous people, which at one time, everybody had their original instructions on how to live before colonization of everybody in the world or the attempt to do that. People lived within a system of balance and harmony and reciprocity. And for Indigenous people, reciprocity means that nothing is ever taken without something given. And the original instructions for Indigenous people, just in a nutshell, it can also be called these days traditional ecological knowledge, tech. And people knew, like, when this butterfly showed up, it was time to plant this seed or go and collect and harvest, make offerings and sing the songs for this type of medicine plant or this type of food, or go, this type of fish was coming through the rivers at this time of year when this when we saw this happen. Of course, that balance has been greatly disturbed, but because of the pandemic, we have seen how quickly the natural system can rejuvenate itself, that it can renew so much quicker than I thought, and I think most of the people that I know thought. And so between where we all were as human beings not that long ago, for the time that our species has been here, and where we've arrived now, is that most people have forgotten how we're supposed to be as human beings, how we're supposed to be interrelating with the rest of the sacred system of life. And so here at the edge of the cliff that we're, if we don't shift our way of thinking, we're just going to fall off. Here we have Indigenous people rising up around the world saying, hey, we have still the most biodiverse places left that didn't get destroyed. We have the information on how we're supposed to move forward because we retained that, for the last 500 years. And so the rights of nature, or the rights of Mother Earth movement, was started in like the mid 2000s, so around 2005, 2006, 2007. And Shannon was one of the original people to really dive headfirst into what that means and how this could be a way forward that is a paradigm shifting way of thinking about how we're to be here. And so there was in 2010 a huge People's Climate Summit down in Bolivia. There were 30,000 people, mostly Indigenous people, some of whom walked hundreds of miles to get there. And out of that huge gathering of people came the Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth, which has been working its way through the UN, but as with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which took 20 years, we know that that's not a quick way forward. And so Shannon and I, and working with Movement Rights and our partners around the world, including the Global Alliance on the Rights of Mother Earth, the Rights of Nature, which Shannon is one of the original founders of, we have worked with tribes and communities on shifting human law to natural law. And so what's very interesting about the work that we do is that outside of Indigenous communities, it's civil disobedience through local lawmaking. And we know that laws that are unjust throughout the history of the United States were changed when people rose up together and said, we're done with that. That's not what we're going to do anymore. That's how slavery was ended. That's how women got the right to vote. That's how the Civil Rights Act was passed. And so here we are at this moment in time that is so critical. And we're looking at how do we work together to protect where we live, writing laws that may be violating the system of structure that's destroying what we need to live, but how we join together to write these laws as a way forward that is a very much quicker way forward than policy change. I started out as a political activist in my baby 20s. And I have done that work. I have worked internationally within the United States and locally. And for me, it felt like nothing was shifting. And so here we have this method of moving forward that that involves how people think about where they live and how to protect the land, the air, the water, the soil, all of our non-human relatives so that we can all move forward together. And I'll pass that on to Shannon.
Thanks, Pennie.
You're welcome.
And thanks everybody for being here, and to the conveners. You have done an amazing job pulling all this together, so I thank you. Just to say, rights of nature it is, as Pennie said, it's civil disobedience through local lawmaking. And what that means is that the law as it stands today in the United States and throughout most of the world says that nature is property, human property. So it is essentially a slave. So when Rights of Nature talks also about the relationship of it's about rights. So if we have human rights, where do those human rights come from, if not from Mother Earth herself? We can't protect the climate, we can't protect the environment as long as the law continues to treat the earth as property. We just can't do it. It is about separating humanity from everything else instead of understanding that we are part of an ecosystem. We're not owners of that ecosystem. So already we're talking about not just breaking law, breaking unjust law. And this is what movements for rights have done always. Once upon a time, it was legal to own other human beings in this country. And it is movements for rights that have shifted this. We see it around us, every day, when we're looking at the movement for Black lives and people taking to the streets. The law is supposed to uphold the values of a society and uphold and protect rights. And when it fails to do that, we have to change the law. So Rights of Nature is about recognizing a fundamental flaw in environmental protection that leaves humans in this separate space as owners of nature instead of part of it. So when we talk about rights of nature, what we're really talking about is the right for ecosystems to exist, persist, and evolve their natural cycles. Now that doesn't sound so radical to me. That sounds kind of like the duh principle. What Rights of Nature really does is it places responsibilities on humans to be caretakers for the ecosystems, and it also shifts this idea that corporations, right now the law says corporations are persons with the right to come in and make legal the destruction of the ecosystems. Right now, and in particular, communities of color are the ones who are, that live closest to the refinery corridors, and everywhere there are sacrifice zones for one bad activity after another. And so Rights of Nature isn't an environmental idea, or it is an environmental justice idea. This isn't just about protecting green spaces. This is about fundamentally shifting the way we relate with our environments locally, nationally, and internationally. And when we first started talking about this work and working with communities to pass these laws, they say you're crazy. First they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then they sort of take you seriously. A dozen years ago, when we started doing this work, it was really just a huge foreign concept for people to understand and to think that we could make this shift. In that time, 12 countries have passed Rights of Nature laws, dozens of US communities, and in just the last 3 years, 5 tribes on Turtle Island, where we live here in the US, have passed laws that recognize the rights of the ecosystems to be protected from specific harms in their communities. So this work is essentially follows in the tradition of civil rights movements. The people who sat in at the lunch counters in the 60s and said, we have the right to be here. That was civil disobedience by confronting unjust law and saying, no, we're going to shift law, we're going to shift culture. And every community that decides to pass these rights of nature laws is being confronted. They're being told that they're a sacrifice zone for one activity or another. And this is a way to shift that cultural mindset and the legal landscape. And so for us, the work we do is to assist communities who are interested in doing just that. And so it is our honor and a privilege for our movement rights to work with communities around the globe, indigenous tribes around the globe, to protect these ideas, and to work with communities who are putting this work down on the ground where they live. And so for us, as people who support and advocate and lift up these communities, it's an honor and a privilege to work with communities who are actually doing the work on the ground. So it's been our honor and privilege to support the North Bay Organizing Project and the people that we're sharing the panel with, who are actually putting that work down on the ground in Sonoma County where they live. And we're excited just to be in the room, just to provide that support and to bring them, the support of all of the other communities and countries who have done this work, and how can we actually help lift this up and do it together. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to our friends at North Bay Organizing Project to talk a little bit about this, because in our workshop, I hope that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about how do you actually make this shift. We all want the same thing. How do we get there? Rights of nature is one tool that communities are using to really shift our relationship. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I think Karym is up next.
Hi, yes, and thank you. My name is Karym Sanchez. First, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. Unfortunately, Tacy Crocker won't be able to join us today. She had to deal with some personal matters and had to take some time off. I'm the lead organizer with the North Bay Organizing Project. And we are a community organization based in Sonoma County. We are composed of 22 member institutions that are different congregations, communities, community organizations, student groups, and what our focus is building community power to address racial, ecological, housing, and numerous amounts of issues, right? The way we go about selecting the issues that we work on is out of our 22 member institutions, we engage in a listening process where we talk to folks about what is important to them. What's going on in their lives? What are they being impacted by? And then we invite folks into a democratic process internally to select the issue work that we're going to do as a organization. The last time that we did that, three issues arose from that process. The first one being housing, because in Sonoma County, housing and the rent prices are skyrocketing, or skyrocketed already. And then also immigrant defense, because we have a big immigrant community. And lastly, but in my opinion, very importantly, climate justice was selected as one of our issues. And from that, we formed the Rights of Mother Earth Group Task Force that has been engaging with community leaders and building a base of support for just that, the rights of Mother Earth. And if you are familiar with Sonoma County, you might know, but if you're not, you might have heard that we are known as wine country. Sometimes folks are familiar with the various vineyards and really fancy wineries that exist in our area, but they also hold a lot of power, right? Oftentimes the power dynamic is that it's the people who own the land and get a lot of profit from it versus the folks who work the land and feel the effects from all the stuff they're spraying on that land, right? And so one of the initiatives that the Rights of Mother Earth Task Force embarked on, and I believe we're going to discuss in more detail in our breakout group, is a ballot initiative to be able to regulate the herbicides and pesticides that are sprayed on all those various vineyards that are impacting the workers, the immigrant families that were of those workers who are breathing it in and bringing that back home, and also because there are so many wineries and vineyards. Oftentimes there's schools and other communities, residential areas that are also feeling the effects. So we embarked in this ballot initiative, and we knew that we were going to be going up against preemption, right? Because our county is telling us that because there's this California law that we can't do anything to say what we think or how we believe the land should be used, or to regulate that, or whether we should have the right to not breathe in poison or not. And what we say is that preemption was created to protect our rights, not limit them, right? So we knew that we were going to be going up against this, and we used that tool of trying to get this ballot initiative as a way to highlight that contradiction and to do some community organizing around. And so without getting into more detail and saving it for our breakout group, I'll leave it at that. And I apologize again that it is just myself today.
Thank you, Karym. Again, if you want to participate in the Rights of Nature session, breakout session, you'll put RN in front of your name in the chat. And next we have a special guest, Assemblymember Ash Kalra, who was first elected to the California legislature in 2016. He represents the 27th district, which is most of San Jose, including the downtown area. And he's just been reelected to his second term. Assemblyman Kalra, most importantly, has authored key legislation that protects ecological systems, particularly the landmark California Migratory Bird Protection Act. And now most recently, and what he's going to speak mostly about today, is legislation that is in the works, AB 3030. So with that, I'd like to welcome the Assemblyman and hear from him. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to hear from some of the other presenters as to the work that we're collectively doing to protect our environment, and not just generally speaking, but actually looking at what can be done at the local level, at the state level, and actually pushing legislation against moneyed interests that do everything they can to keep the status quo alive. It's something that I've been fighting for a long time, like many others I know that are part of this convening. When I was on the San Jose City Council, we successfully fought against the Phillips 66 project down in San Luis Obispo, since San Jose was the largest urban area that those oil trains were going to come through. Also worked a lot to try to preserve Coyote Valley, which I'll continue to work on in the legislature. And so before I get to AB 3030, I do want to touch on some other legislation, both past and current, to get a sense of not only what's been done, but how much more needs to be done. And so as soon as I got elected in 2016, got sworn in December 2016, I introduced a bill a few minutes later, which was calling on our pension funds to divest from the Dakota Access Pipeline. I had gone to Standing Rock a week after the election, and that was the first bill I introduced. Now, as is oftentimes the case for those that pay attention to the legislative process, certainly in Sacramento, the bill did get watered down and it lost a lot of its potency, although we were able to get an evaluation of the impact on Indigenous rights as part of the evaluation process going forward for our pension funds. But I think it speaks to the fact of how powerful some of the interests that we're fighting are, particularly in Sacramento and certainly in DC, but even at the local level, in the cities and the county boards of supervisors. As you try to push some of these initiatives, you can see the resistance that you face going forward. As was just mentioned by Elaine, the California Migratory Bird Protection Act was something that I introduced, and it took me a couple of years working with my colleagues, working with Audubon Society and other sponsors to get that signed into law. And under the current presidential administration, as you can imagine, they pulled us out of a lot of environmental treaties and agreements. And one was the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so essentially we got put in place in California law. We codified the Migratory Bird Treaty Act into California law, so that as businesses operate in California, they have to mitigate the number of birds that are incidentally taken or really killed through their operations. And so that was a big win for us to push back against the federal administration and show that California is going to continue to lead the way in terms of protecting our environment. Another bill that I worked on was the Coyote Valley Conservation Program. For those that aren't familiar, Coyote Valley is here in San Jose, the southern portion of San Jose, the largest undeveloped swath of land really in Silicon Valley. And so we just got that passed last year to allow and to help facilitate our open space authority, our city, and other advocacy groups and different foundations and funds to start to buy up the land to preserve Coyote Valley for generations to come. And the other bill that I had done that got some newsworthiness to it was the single-use hotel toiletries bill to get rid of all those small little plastic bottles. Literally, close to $500 million are placed just in California hotel rooms every year. They're not recycled. And so, those are the types of steps we have to do in addition to larger bills that are currently, there is a bill on plastics right now in the legislature that's being stalled. And I want to speak to a couple of things that are happening in the legislature, most specifically AB 345 by Murtsuchi, which would create a setback of 2,500 feet when there's any drilling activity, oil and gas activity. It's sponsored by the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, because as was mentioned by a couple other speakers already, we know that this kind of activity, the drilling and fracking and all that, is usually near communities of concern, communities that are heavily populated by Latinos, African American communities, low-income communities. And so it is environmental racism that's occurring throughout our state, throughout our nation, that we have to fight back against. This bill is getting a tremendous amount of pushback from the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry. And so that's AB 345. So see, it's on the Senate side, see what you can do to support that. Again, AB 345. Before I get to AB 3030, another couple bills that I've introduced, I've gotten stalled due to COVID because we've had to dramatically reduce the number of bills that we have. I introduced 27 at the beginning of the year. I think I'm down to like 7 now. Luckily, AB 3030 is still alive and kicking. But one of them is the California Deforestation Free Procurement Act. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to visit the Brazilian Amazon in Acre, Brazil. And so what this would do, it would prevent the state of California as a very large entity, with the 5th largest economy in the world. Our state is a large procurement entity. So it prevents the state from procuring anything that contributes to tropical deforestation. Only Norway and France have this policy in place. If we adopt it, we being the 5th largest economy in the world, we would be the largest economy in the world to have this type of policy in place. That bill has got installed this year, but I'm bringing it back again next year. Another bill that we were ready to introduce this year and got really impacted by the COVID crisis is a farm transition bill, really to allow to help facilitate, especially small family farms, transition from meat and dairy farming to plant-based farming. As a vegan, that's something important to me, but also in terms of the impact on our environment. We know that plant-based is far better for the environment because it's those same plant-based farms that feed into the animal and dairy farms. And so you're really, it's a complete lack of efficiency in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. It dramatically increases with meat and dairy farming. So that's kind of a quick rundown of some of the bills that I'm working on, that our legislature is working on, that we need the support from the community. Now I'd like to talk more specifically about AB 3030. And so, if you ask anyone, and we've heard it already here from so many, that why people love to live in California, it is the environment. It's our treasured oceans, our public lands, our open spaces, and we're lucky to be able to share this splendor with the vast array of native species, including plants, our migratory birds, aquatic animals, and wildlife. Our experience over the past few months is collectively committing to slow the spread of COVID-19 through social distancing, sheltering at home, and what have you, has only reinforced how critical nature is to California's way of life. Nature has been one of our few escapes where we can get away from the stresses of this global pandemic and actually breathe in the air and actually have some mental health and emotional, in addition to the physical rehabilitation. And so as we settle into this new decade, we also know scientists are sounding the alarm that nature is facing unprecedented challenges. Without action, the California we know and love will cease to exist. And so this year I introduced AB 3030 to put our state at the forefront of global environmentalism, global environmental conservation. I introduced it before the COVID crisis, but I think the COVID crisis reiterates the need for it. It is one of the last few remaining environmental bills still in the legislature this year, as most of the bills have been set aside or are not active anymore because of the emphasis on the COVID response. If enacted, California would be the first state in the country to take statewide action right in the next chapter in our proud history of environmental leadership. And I'm pleased to see the broad support behind AB 3030 from our sponsors, Audubon Society, Azul, Defenders of Wildlife, and the NRDC, to countless other organizations across the state, national, regional. This is getting national attention. And so the bill really is about preserving 30% of our land and our water by 2030. And although we have to remember that California has made progress in conservation, many areas of exceptional biodiversity are not protected, and many disadvantaged communities do not have access to natural areas. So let's remember, as we're talking about social equity and the Black liberation movement that has taken to the streets, that protecting our open spaces doesn't just mean making more parks in remote corners of our state. It also means improving access to nature for all people in our state, including for communities of color and economically disadvantaged community that are oftentimes have park deficits in their own neighborhoods. And so that's why AB 3030 is about protecting biodiversity and promoting greater equity in outdoor access. Building on past leadership, a statutory commitment from California to protect our precious resources and increase access to nature in the next decade will help ensure that all Californians can enjoy the benefit that nature provides, and that wild areas can continue to enhance the strength and well-being of our state and the planet. And one last thing I want to speak to on the urgency, because some people, especially as it goes to the legislative process, say, well, is this urgent right now? Can't we just focus on COVID? Some of what I've already talked about speaks to why it's relevant to COVID, but also early next year, there's going to be the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity is convening. They're going to meet in May of 2021, and a 30 by 30 policy internationally is going to be reviewed and hopefully voted on by the United Nations. We can make California a national and international leader in the growing 30 by 30 movement, and really speak to not just what other states can do, but what other nations can do. And I think that we have seen especially when we look at this particular global pandemic that we know is likely spread from animals to humans as a result of habitat loss and overexploitation. The effect of the biodiversity crisis on people is more pronounced than ever. We must not only have a scientific buffer with wildlife and our friends in the animal kingdom that we've already, so detrimentally damaged. We have to have these physical buffers as well to actually protect these spaces. I know that together we can turn the tide for our struggling ecosystems, for the planet, and for ourselves, but it's not going to be easy. AB 3030 is not the end goal, it's the start. It's the beginning of making sure that we set a goal for 2030 and then put the policies behind it at the local level as well as at the state level and ultimately nationally and internationally. So let's set that goal, then put the policy, the muscle behind it, so to speak. And then when we get the 2030 goal in place, then let's go to 50% by 2050 and all these other goals that scientists are telling us we need to achieve. But let's first start by 30 by 30 by 2030. Protect our lands, protect our waters, protect our ocean and our coastlines, fight against sea level rise, fight against contaminated air and water. We can do it all. We can do it all, but we have to fight for it. So thank you all so much for having me, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Assemblyman. So we've heard from our guests about several different tools that can be used and leveraged in protecting ecosystems and natural systems. And so now, as we go into our breakout sessions, we're asking our participants to decide which breakout session they would like to go to and to indicate their preference by changing their name in Zoom